All right, so you know how Microsoft was like totally convinced that Windows 10 was going to be it, like the end-all be-all of Windows versions.
Hmm.
Well, surprise, surprise, they're kind of changing their minds. They're saying by 2025, Windows 10 is getting the sunset treatment, meaning, like it or not, everyone's going to have to upgrade.
Yeah.
And get this, the big deal with these new versions, they're going to be, like, seriously packed with AI. And, well, not everybody's exactly thrilled about that.
It really is fascinating. This whole thing kind of shows this tension, right, between like all this crazy innovation happening and, how much control users actually have. Microsoft's going full speed ahead with all this AI integration, like Copilot, Recall, all that stuff. But the question is, are all these fancy AI features actually good for everyone? Or is it like maybe pushing people towards a system they're not really comfortable with?
Yeah, it's that they promise stability, right, with Windows 10. But then this whole 180 they're pulling is forcing everyone to adapt,
Mhm.
especially people who, I don't know, they like things to stay the same, or people with older computers that might not be able to handle it. And this AI push is a big, big part of that. You mentioned Copilot before, which is supposed to be like what this AI helper for everything you do. Can you like break that down a little?
Sure. So Copilot is kind of like, well, imagine having an AI buddy who can help you get things done on your computer. It can like give you a hand with tasks, look up information for you. It's designed to make your whole digital life smoother. But here's where it gets a little weird. Microsoft is pushing it onto even older devices, which, well, it's causing some confusion, let's say.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Some people with older systems, after they update, suddenly they've got this like rainbow icon they never seen before, and they're like, what in the world is this?
Yeah.
And how do I get rid of it? It feels like for a lot of people, all these AI features are just like appearing whether they asked for them or not.
And then there's Recall, which is causing, well, a lot of concern, especially about privacy. The thing is, Recall is supposed to take like screenshots of what you're doing on your computer so you can, I guess, look back at what you've been doing. But the problem is it just turns itself on after updates, a lot of times without even asking the user.
Oh, wow. So your computer could be like secretly taking pictures of your work
Uh,
and saving them somewhere. Yikes. I know Microsoft says, that the data is stored securely and all that, but yeah, I can see why people would be freaked out,
yeah.
especially since they don't really have a say in it.
And that's the thing, right? It makes you wonder if this is like a sign of things to come. Will we see more companies doing this, collecting tons of data for AI, even if people don't want them to? It's something to keep an eye on for sure.
It really makes you wonder if it's worth sticking with Windows at all.
Hmm.
But before we go down that road, there's another big concern about all this AI stuff I think we need to talk about.
Yeah.
And that's, well, how accurate is it? And is the information it gives us actually safe?
You're right. We can't just assume that AI is always right or that we can trust it completely. There's actually been like research and studies showing that a lot of the recommendations AI gives out, especially for stuff like medicine, could be wrong. And not just wrong, but potentially dangerous.
That is scary. I mean, think about people who they rely on what they find online to make decisions, important decisions, like about their health.
Yeah.
The potential for AI to give bad advice, especially for something that serious, is something we definitely can't ignore.
Definitely. It's so important to like not just blindly trust what AI systems tell us, especially when it comes to our health. Thinking critically, doing your own research, that's all more important now than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about control for a minute.
Yeah.
Specifically, what happens when people try to like fight back against these features? Like you mentioned recall, a lot of people are concerned about that,
Yeah.
right? Anyway, they want to turn it off. But it turns out it's not that easy.
Yeah, see, the thing is, Microsoft kind of made Recall like a requirement for the new File Explorer, the one with the tabs and the dark mode, all that. So if you turn off Recall, you could lose all those features and basically be stuck with the old clunky File Explorer.
So you're saying to avoid having their computer secretly take pictures of what they're doing, people might have to give up features they use all the time. That doesn't seem fair.
No, it doesn't. And because of all this, because of the privacy worries, the feeling of not having control, a lot of people are starting to look at, well, completely ditching Windows. They're checking out other operating systems like Linux.
I've heard that Linux is gaining popularity, especially with people who they really value their privacy and they want to be able to, customize their systems and have more control over things. And I've heard it's not even that hard to switch these days, right?
Right. There are some versions of Linux that are designed to feel almost exactly like Windows. So for someone who's thinking about switching, it's not as scary as it might seem. But before we get into all that, I think we should dig a little deeper into, this whole AI integration thing and how it's affecting people who are actually using Windows.
For sure. What's really interesting to me is how this whole situation with Microsoft, it kind of reflects what's happening in the bigger tech world. Like, is this a preview of what's coming from other companies? Will everyone be pushing AI on us, whether we like it or not?
It definitely makes you think, doesn't it? And it
Yeah.
also makes you think about, like, what about people who aren't as comfortable with technology or people who don't have the newest, fanciest computers? Will they be left behind in this AI-powered future?
That's a really good point. We can't just assume that everyone's on board with all this. We need to make sure that technology is accessible to everyone and that it doesn't leave anyone out.
Exactly. Technology should be for everyone, not just the people who are already, super tech savvy.
Okay, so there's obviously a lot to talk about here. It's clear that this decision by Microsoft to, phase out Windows 10 and go all in on AI is a pretty big deal. And it sparked a lot of different reactions. Some people are excited, others are concerned, and some people are even questioning whether they want to use Windows anymore at all. But before we end this part of our deep dive, there's one more thing I want to touch on.
The broken promise. The whole Windows 10 is the last version thing.
Yeah, exactly. They promised stability. They promised that we wouldn't have to deal with big changes anymore. But then they go and do this. And it's not just the AI thing. It's the whole feeling of like, hey, we thought we could trust you, but now we're not so sure. I think a lot of people feel that way. But we can unpack that more in part two.
This whole Windows 10 thing, it really makes you think about that other time when Microsoft really messed up. Remember Windows 8?
Oh yeah, Windows 8. Ugh, that was rough. A lot of people tried to forget that whole thing even happened. What's interesting is like in both cases, Microsoft was trying to do something big,
Yeah.
like a huge change, but just didn't work out. People hated it.
Yeah, exactly. With Windows 8, it was all about touch screens,
Yeah.
right? That was their big thing. But for most people, it was just, I don't know, it just didn't make sense. It was too different, especially for people who were used to, like, the normal way of using Windows.
And the backlash was like huge. I mean, people were really upset. So Microsoft had to like backtrack. They pretty much admitted they messed up, and then they gave us Windows 10, which was more like what people wanted.
And now it feels like maybe they're making the same mistake again,
Yeah.
just in a different way. This time it's not about the way Windows looks, it's about all this AI stuff they're pushing.
Right.
But it's the same idea, right? It's about like finding that balance between, doing something new and innovative and actually listening to what users want.
It's almost ironic, right? Because this whole AI push, which Microsoft is saying is the future and all that, it's actually driving some people away from Windows completely. And they're going to, well, you guessed it, Linux.
It is kind of funny when you think about it because Linux is like the opposite of Windows in a lot of ways. It's open source, you can customize it however you want, and it's known for being really good for privacy. And now all these people who are frustrated with Microsoft, they're turning to Linux instead.
And like we were saying before, Linux isn't as hard to use as it used to be. There are versions of Linux that look and feel almost exactly like Windows. So if you're thinking about making the switch, it might not be as big of a deal as you think.
It's like Microsoft is accidentally helping their competition by pushing these features that some people just don't want. It's like they just assume that everyone is as excited about AI as they are, but that's not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the hype of new technology, right? But you have to remember, not everyone is on the same page. Not everyone wants the newest, latest thing. And if you start forcing features on people without giving them a choice, well, they're going to get upset. And they might start looking for something else.
It's like imagine if someone told you that you had to like remodel your house in a certain way. Even if you didn't like it, you'd be pretty mad, right? Same with our computers. We want to be able to choose how we use them, how they look, how they work. We want control.
Exactly. It's about respecting people's choices.
Mm.
Technology should be there to help us, not to like dictate how we live our lives.
Mm.
And speaking of control, there's another big issue here we need to talk about. Security.
Right, because the more complicated you make a system, the more opportunities there are for like bad guys to get in. And when you start adding AI into everything, well, you're making the whole system a lot more complex, which means there are more ways for hackers to, break in and steal your data.
And it's not just about like protecting your personal information anymore. It's also about, well, the potential for AI to be used for bad things, like creating fake videos that look totally real, or spreading misinformation, even like manipulating people without them realizing it.
It's scary stuff, and it's not something we can just ignore. Because as AI gets more and more advanced, these problems are only going to get worse.
It's like having a super powerful tool, right? It can be used for good, but it can also be really dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's not just up to the companies making this technology to make sure it's used responsibly. It's up to all of us. We need to be aware of the risks, we need to be careful about what information we share, and we need to hold these companies accountable.
It all comes back to that question, right? Are we in control of technology or is it controlling us? It's something we need to keep asking ourselves, especially as things get more and more complicated.
The future of AI is not set in stone. It depends on the choices we make today, as individuals, as consumers, as a society.
So for our listeners who are like, okay, what does all this mean for me? What advice would you give them?
I would say, first of all, don't panic. You don't have to ditch Windows right this second. But it is important to stay informed, do your research, and figure out if all this AI stuff is something you actually want or need.
And if you're not comfortable with it, well, remember there are alternatives. Linux is a great option if you're looking for more privacy and control. And there are plenty of resources out there to help you make the switch if you decide to go that route.
At the end of the day, the choice is yours. But make it an informed choice. The more you know about the technology you're using, the better decisions you can make.
Well said. This whole conversation has definitely given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners. It's clear that the future of technology is being shaped right now, and it's up to us to make sure it's a future we actually want.
Absolutely. Staying informed and engaged is so important. And remember, you're not alone in all this. There are communities and resources out there to help you navigate this whole crazy world of technology.
Okay, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into, all this AI stuff with Microsoft. And wow, we've covered a lot, haven't we? It's been, well, pretty intense. We talked about Windows 10 going away, the privacy issues with recall, and, how this whole thing could change the tech world as we know it.
Yeah, it really feels like this whole move by Microsoft is making everyone think, about what AI means for our lives. How do we balance all this new technology with our
Right.
own choices and control? And what about the ethics of it all as AI gets, more powerful and more widespread?
It's funny because as we've been talking, I keep thinking about how this whole Windows and AI thing, it's kind of like a small version of what's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, look around. AI is popping up in our phones, our houses, even our cars. It's not just on our computers anymore.
It's true. It's like AI isn't some far off thing in the future anymore. It's here. It's now. And the thing is, as AI gets more advanced, more capable, it brings up even more questions, right? Like what happens when AI starts making decisions that really affect us? How do we make sure it's fair? How do we prevent bias? These are things we need to be thinking about like right now.
And, going back to what we were talking about before, it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how it's used, how it's implemented. And Microsoft with Windows, they seem to be taking this like all or nothing approach.
Yeah.
It's AI everywhere, whether you want it or not.
Right, and that brings up this whole idea of like user agency. It's not about saying no to AI completely. It's about having a choice, being able to decide how and when AI is part of your life. It's about making sure technology makes our lives better, not more complicated, not more invasive.
It's like, I don't know, imagine you have this really powerful tool. It can do amazing things, but it can also be dangerous if you're not careful. It's the same with AI.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for everyone to be involved, not just the companies making this technology, but all of us. We need to understand how AI works, what it can do, what the risks are. We need to ask questions. We need to make sure these companies are being responsible.
It always comes back to that question, doesn't it? Are we in control of technology or is it controlling us? And as AI gets more and more powerful, that question is going to be even more important.
The thing is, the future of AI, it's not set in stone. It really depends on what we do now. The choices we make as individuals, as consumers, as a society, it all matters.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with this. Stay curious, keep learning, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to speak up. The future of technology is in our hands. Let's make sure it's a good one. Thanks for joining us.